Welcome back to KTN Weekend Prime. The point of news right now, we're just about to get into the other Kenya, and of course the discussion still around that horrifying attack on April the 2nd, leaving 147 people dead in Garissa University College. But today we are talking about countering the narratives that have been spun by terrorists, by the Al-Shabaab, and the role of religious Muslim leaders in doing so. Have they done enough? Have they been doing enough as it is? Or is there a gap that you see needs to be filled? And of course, speaking to me this evening, I've got four very accomplished gentlemen on this subject. Right next to me is Sheikh Mohammed Shakul, a Muslim scholar as well as a property owner here in Nairobi. Thank you very much for joining us. First time on KTN Weekend Prime, I hope not the last. Of course, we've got Dr. Hassan Kenywa. He is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi as well as a director for religious affairs of the Supreme Council of Kenyan Muslims. Right next to him, not an unfamiliar face to KTN, we've got Dr. Mustafa Ali, a conflict resolution analyst. And right at the end there is Ibrahim Lathome, a lawyer, Muslim scholar. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. Before we get into this discussion, the discussion, of course, is predicated on perceptions that have been spun, whether rightly or wrongly, in the wake of this attack. One of them is now coming from the Christian community, at least a section of it. The Evangelical Alliance yesterday had a press conference condemning the attack, and some of the sentiments there perhaps represent what is happening in the Christian community as well as others outside of the Muslim community. Let's just listen in to Dr. Mark Kariuki's sentiments. He's the chairman of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya.
How many times have we called the press and released a statement, and yet we are still attacked? And I don't feel the confidence even of reading this statement. I just decide to tear it up and say we are tired. We are tired of reading statements while our people are being killed. Somebody needs to do something. The government needs to rise up and save our people. We are demanding, first of all, the northeastern leaders resign. And after you have resigned, then let's get information coming to the intelligence and let's bring change. We are calling you for a day of prayer. We are calling you for a day of prayer. And I want to ask you to come, all of you, so we can be able to pray together and call upon the name of the Lord. The God who saved Israel will save this nation.
Quite some angry sentiments there from Mark Kariuki. He's the chairman of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. Now, gentlemen, let's speak about this. Let's start with you, Bwana Lithome. What's your immediate reaction to that kind of a statement? Do you think it's justified that the Christian community would now come out so angry, given, of course, the very horrifying events of
John, whereas, of course, when something like what happened in Garissa happens, it's natural for a human being to feel pain. All of us are pained. But I think as leaders, we need to exercise some restraint, because there are people watching us, people who want us to guide them. What we want, John, here is not just reacting. What we want is solutions. I want to agree with him when he says we want solutions. Actually, all of us are tired, whether you are Muslim, Christian, but any Kenyan, any peace-loving Kenyan in this country. We as Muslim religious leaders also, we want peace, so we want solutions. But I don't think by pointing or apportioning blame we'll get the solution. I think we need to stand together, both Muslims, Christians, the government. Each one of us has a role to play, and that is what will bring peace in this country and a solution to this problem that has haunted us now for so long. We have lost so many innocent Kenyans. I think enough is enough, but I think we need to come together, restrain ourselves.
All right. In terms of restraint, it does sound like the path to walk on right now, and in fact, it is the path to walk on. But his sentiment is shared by a lot of people, a lot of people in the Christian faith, who have watched these attacks unfold one after the other, especially the macabre way in which the Al-Shabaab seems to be selecting its victims. Now, that kind of a reaction perhaps is angry, but it is shared by a lot of people. How, as the Muslim leadership, Muslim religious leadership, should you be able to counter these kinds of narratives that are coming out from the Al-Shabaab?
One thing I would like to say here, looking at our constitution, it's known that the primary responsibility of ensuring that Kenyans and their property are secure in this country is the responsibility of the government. It's very clear. But that does not mean that each one of us are not stakeholders, and we have a role to play. So I think what we need to do here is tell the government what it has failed to do. The government has failed us as a country. It has failed in its primary constitutional responsibility of securing Kenyans. And then also ask ourselves, we as Muslim leaders, where have we failed? What role are we supposed to play? And I want to say here very categorically, as a Muslim leader, I know that I've been ordered by my religion that wherever there is something evil, and this is evil, we call it munkar, then I have a responsibility to stand up, use whatever means I can, and make sure that that evil is removed. And I want to say this, Islam is a religion that is very balanced. Actually, my Prophet, may peace be upon him, tells me, rescue your brother, whether he is the oppressor or the oppressed. For the oppressed, it is very clear. But if you discover that your brother is the oppressor, you're told you rescue him or her by stopping them from oppressing. So again, I want to repeat, each one of us now, we need to revisit ourselves. We need to re-examine ourselves. What roles are we supposed to play? What role does the leadership of the Muslim community need to play? But again, John, one thing that has to come out very clearly, it is wrong when somebody, an individual, claiming to belong to a certain faith, does something in the name of that faith, then there is that blanket condemnation. We are receiving that right now, which I think is not right. We need to apportion blame, or whoever is guilty, let them face the law. But we need to come together. You know, by apportioning blame, we are not solving this. We are not going to solve this problem.
Okay, Mustafa, let's come to you on this. He's just given a very clear narrative that should be coming out. But let's be honest, it doesn't come out often enough. And in terms of the strategic advantage, when we're speaking about the communication about terrorism, it seems like the terrorists have that kind of advantage. They are louder in their narratives, in the spinning of the narratives around what they are doing. Why are narratives like the one that Sheikh Ibrahim Lethome spoke of just now not coming out, not percolating as much?
Yeah, thank you, John. First of all, our condolences to the bereaved families that have lost their loved one due to the terrorist attacks in Garissa. I just want to pick from where Sheikh Lethome left. The counter narratives that we should be seeing coming out in the event of this kind of attacks, and the narratives that are being put out there by terrorist groups and other militant groups are not effective to actually counter those narratives. One of the key reasons is that this is a global phenomenon, and it's not just here in Kenya that we are failing in this. It's just that this is happening in the country. I think the mainstream Muslim organizations have failed, and have failed dismally, to actually launch a spirited counter-narrative that is going to delegitimize the ideology and the narratives that are coming from groups like the ones that have been operating in this country and in other places. And there are many reasons why the Muslim organizations, the Muslim clerics, have actually not been effective in countering the narrative that is coming from Al-Shabaab. Some of it are internal to the Muslim organizations, some of it are actually external to the Muslim organizations and the clerics themselves, and so it's a very difficult thing to actually engage. But the challenge has got to go back to the Muslim organizations. You've got to start from somewhere. And I want to share this with the Muslim leadership in this country, that we have failed. Most of our institutions are incapable of engaging in a robust counter-narrative that is going to delegitimize the narratives that are there. And the reasons why these organizations are failing is that they're so weak. the way they are structured, the leadership that is there is so weak. That is not able to do that.
Let's just hold that thought. We have a representative of SUPKEM here, Dr. Hassan Kenywa. Do you agree that, for instance, SUPKEM has failed in its mandate to provide a strong counter-narrative, not just when attacks occur, but all the time?
I think in one way I'll agree with my brother. In fact, my just recent completed a doctorate is on Islamic leadership in this country. But in one way or another, SUPKEM tries its level best to see that Kenyans are well taken care of. They communicate to Kenyans, they coordinate Kenyans. But the problem is that there are many other Muslim organizations in Kenya which, instead of collaborating and cooperating with SUPKEM, they compete with SUPKEM and not in the positive manner.
But isn't that the problem right there, that SUPKEM believes that it is the one that needs to be cooperated with, rather than going out and cooperating with other organizations like CIPK, like NAMLEF, like the Council of Imams?
SUPKEM, being the umbrella body of Muslims in Kenya, of course it's the one which is supposed to coordinate and try to call upon other organizations to be with it. So something has failed. There's a problem somewhere.
Yes, and that's the problem I'm trying to point at. Is it that SUPKEM has been reluctant to go out and seek these organizations and bring them into the fold as the organizing body?
SUPKEM has tried its level best to bring on board all those bodies, but sometimes they are also resistant. Yes.
All right, what do you think needs to happen? Because we can sit here and say that there's been resistance and that SUPKEM has failed. What needs to happen now so that these narratives start to change and you bring moderate Muslims on board in trying to fight the narratives that have been spun?
The logo of SUPKEM has always been وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, that all Muslims are supposed to unite under one body, so that at least they have the unity, they have the power, and they have everything. So I call upon all Muslims in this country, all Muslim organizations, to cooperate, collaborate, and unite for the betterment of Islam and betterment of all Kenyans of this country.
All right, Sheikh Mohammed Shakul, we continue off of where Sheikh Hassan has left off. Do we even know how it is that radical Muslims are radicalizing people in Kenya? Do we even know what they're using? Maybe I'd just like to hear from you about that. How are they radicalizing people? Where are they radicalizing people? Does the leadership know this?
Okay. Before I go into the answer to your question, I'd like to also send my condolences to the grieving families, the mothers and fathers who lost their beloved ones, and to my all fellow Kenyans. Also, to the sentiment that we have just heard from the evangelics, I would like to say that when we talk like that, we are actually fulfilling the wishes of Al-Shabaab, which they want to divide us into Muslim-Christian fight.
All right, but to that I'd ask, what's your comment then when you see in Mpeketoni, in Garissa, as was witnessed, that Christians were being separated from Muslims, Muslims were being let go, and Christians were being killed?
You see, this is, if you look at what's happening in Somalia, they're killing the Somalis, Muslims, at mosques. To separate people here between Christian and Muslims is an agenda. It's a plea that they want us to fall, and we are falling to that. So I want my fellow Kenyans to know that this is not about Islam, Christian. If it is, then why are they killing Muslims in Somalia, in the mosques? So we have to understand that this is to create fitna between the Muslim and Christian who lived in peace and harmony for many, many thousands of years together, and God put these people together here. So we shall not be falling into that trap.
All right, just because you represent some of the areas of Muslim leadership here, I'll just ask this: why hasn't there been a fatwa declared against, for instance, the teachings of Al-Shabaab, as there have been edicts declared that would give some sort of leadership to the Muslim community? Why hasn't that happened here?
It has happened. People and Muslims are aware. You see, the Islamic scholars can only speak at the mosques, and we do that at the big mosques. We condemn, we tell that Islam is the religion of the middle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We have made you an ummah that's the middle. We're not to this extreme or to that extreme. So that teaching is going on really in the mosques, and anytime that something like this happens, scholars speak out, they teach what's right, and they're taking a burden, and sometimes there is a lack of cooperation from the government, like what happened in the list that you have recently received. One of the scholars, Sheikh Omar, the well-known, was very critical of Al-Shabaab and how he had so many lectures and discussions, yet he was added to that list. So there's something missing here. You know, the gap needs to be filled.
Before we get to that disconnect, you've spoken about how Muslim scholars speak from the mosques with respect to teaching fellow Muslims about what is right and what is wrong. But groups like Al-Shabaab, groups like ISIS are online. They're in the places where people congregate. Where are the voices of reason in these spaces? Because teaching of radical Islam does not just happen in a mosque as it did perhaps with Sheikh Abu Drogo, the late Sheikh Abu Drogo. It happens everywhere now. We're in a society where information is liberalized in that respect. Sheikh Lifome.
I want to say this on the question of fatwa. One thing we have to accept that the setting of Muslims in Kenya is different from any other country. Like in Somalia, of course, there was that coming together of scholars, and they gave that fatwa. But talking against radicalization and violence extremism, we have been doing it. But maybe we can say not loud enough. But I want to say this, in every mosque, the majority of mosques, there are only a few mosques that you can point out, like the ones you've just mentioned here. But in the majority of mosques in this country, the teachings there is counter-radicalization. But I want to agree one thing, we need to become loud. Maybe the voice of radicalization and violence and extremism has been louder than this. But then again, talking about security, even of the scholars, I want to tell you this, most of the mainstream Muslim scholars are on the hit list of the Al-Shabaab.
So you're caught in a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, that's the thing. And we have seen examples of sheikhs who have been attacked in Mombasa. Sheikh Ali Bahero was beaten almost to death. After that, Sheikh Idris, who was very vocal against this, he was killed. So is the government ready also to provide security and work closely with the Muslim leadership? And also, when you come up with a list of people you suspect that these people are supporting the Al-Shabaab, we find on the list people we know are on the hit list of Al-Shabaab, like some of the sheikhs who have been mentioned there. So sometimes you wonder how you're supposed to work, but all is not lost. I want to say all is not lost.
All right, we need to move this along rather quickly. Unfortunately, time just seems to be getting away from us. Dr. Mustafa, then how do we bridge these gaps? Because there seems to be a disconnect between what the government is saying and doing, what the Muslim leadership is saying and doing, and the moderates on the ground are what they are supposed to be guided to do. From the governmental level, what do you think needs to happen now so that there is either more talk along the lines of a counter-narrative within a Muslim community?
Thank you. Very quickly, I think what the government has in place is a counter-terrorism policy or strategy. The government doesn't have a counter-radicalization strategy, neither does it have a counter-violent extremism strategy. And a counter-radicalization, counter-violent extremism strategy is different from a counter-terrorism strategy. Now, the counter-radicalization, counter-violent extremism strategy is something then that the government would work together very closely with the Muslim leaders and community in this country to address radicalization and violent extremism. Governments have often failed dismally, not just here but around the world, in addressing radicalization, because governments cannot address radicalization. It's the communities that need to address radicalization. It's the communities that need to address violent extremism. And therefore, I would, for example, wish to see a task force formed by the government and the faith community here in the country to look at this issue more critically and come up with solutions.
All right. One solution from you as we wind up, Sheikh Hassan, what do you think can be one of the quick fixes now as we look for more long-term solutions as pointed to by Dr. Mustafa?
I think the quick solution is the government cooperate with Muslims and work towards this, because we have advised the government many times that they should work with Muslim leaders, and I believe if they work with Muslim leaders, then we will work on this. But
the question is then, which Muslim leaders, like we went back to, which ones? CIPK, NAMLEF, SUPKEM?
Of course, when you talk about this, it will be Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims. Then Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims will coordinate other scholars who will work towards this.
All right.
Yes.
Now, as we wind up, we can't get away from the events of this past week, especially today. I'd just like your quick comments around a number of issues. Of course, that list of individuals and companies and hawalas that whose accounts have been frozen. Sheikh Shakul, you know quite a number of these people. What is your opinion of this?
My opinion on this list, to me, is just not a good list, I would say. It doesn't have any base. The reason to that, these 86 people, in the list you'll find people who died 4.5 years ago. There is another sheikh who died 4 months ago. Mm-hmm. We have the scholars who are very vocal and critics about Al-Shabaab. We have the hawala and buses and stuff like that. So I don't know who put up this list, but this list does not necessarily the right list, I would say. I don't know how the government come up with that kind of list.
All right, Sheikh Hassan, how about the move by the government to close the camp in the Dadaab refugee camp within 3 months? Do you think that is something that could help the current fight?
I think this is total injustice, because I don't think what wrong or sin has been committed by people in the Dadaab refugees.
In the government's defense, during the Westgate attack, it emerged that a number of the attackers used that as a base to come into Kenya. So there is some basis, but do you think in its entirety the camp should be closed?
It shouldn't be closed.
All right.
It is the government to work on its security.
How about you, Mustafa?
Well, I don't want to comment on that. I think the international values, norms and conventions that the Kenyan government is signatory to, and I think it's very important that these conventions are actually followed. We are talking about counter-radicalization here. What I would really like to see in this country, we have to debate, we have to generate debate about the Muslim leadership in this country, and I want to challenge SUPKEM, the Supreme Council of Kenyan Muslims. Yeah. We have to address these issues. If it's about the capacity issues that is not there at the Supreme Council of Kenyans, if it's about the leadership that is very ineffective, that cannot address these issues, we have to start this debate. We cannot keep on pushing it to other quarters. Right. We have to address it within the Muslim community in this country.
Hopefully that debate has started tonight on KTN Weekend Prime. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, gentlemen. There's lots more that we could have spoken about, but unfortunately time has caught up with us. Sheikh Mohammed Shakul, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Hassan Kenyua from the University of Nairobi, and SUPKEM, thanks a lot for joining us. Dr. Mustafa Ali, as always, thank you very much for joining us, as well as Sheikh Ibrahim Lithome. This discussion is one, like we said, needs to start coming out. We at KTN have tried to do this quite a number of times, not just this year, but as well as last year, a number of discussions that we had on the bottom line, and the point of those discussions being that we as Kenyans need to be able to come together, ventilate these issues, and move forward as one country. But of course, there are other points to these discussions, Yvonne.
All right, so in following that discussion tonight on The Other Kenya, the first thing that comes to mind is the counter-narrative. This is something we have dealt with here for some time now. If you remember, when we were in Mombasa doing KTN Bottom Line, this was one of the major things that we discussed. What is that counter-narrative going to be? What is that strategy that will be put in place, not just by Muslim leaders and scholars, but also by the government? Some of the suggestions that are coming up from the panel tonight, that the government should have a counter-radicalization and a strategy to counter violent extremism, something that cannot necessarily be done at government level, but something that needs to make sure it involves the community at every stage, from conception right up until its implementation, because like they said, radicalization is something that happens at the community level. Perhaps that is one way to start towards putting together a counter narrative that needs to come from Muslim leaders and indeed government leaders, and just about everyone that is involved in the fight against terror. One of the things perhaps that would help in forming that counter-narrative is protection of those that are in the fight against terror. Many will remember the killing of Sheikh Idris, so the government also needs to help in that regard in terms of providing security for those that are making an attempt at providing a counter-narrative to radicalization or extremism in this country. The second point that is important to note is unity of purpose, speaking with one voice. We have several Muslim organizations in the country. We've got NAMLIF, the National Muslim Leaders Forum. We've got CIPK, which is the Council of Imams and Preachers of Kenya, and SUPKEM, Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims. We need them to speak with one voice so that we know who is saying what, and at that point, once it comes as a very strong united force, then this might help in terms of making that counter-narrative that much stronger. When it comes to Muslim leaders and speaking with one voice, it is important, like one of our viewers has said this evening, that the extremists are more visible than the moderates. Many will remember Sheikh Abu Drogo, but we need to start to see Muslim leadership coming out a little stronger and being just as visible, if not more, than those who are preaching extremism. Finally, the last point tonight is in the fight against radicalization, in the fight against terror. Because Al-Shabaab and these other groups use Islam incorrectly, who better knows the truth than Muslims? Therefore, moderate Muslims can take the lead and tell everybody else and involve and explain to the rest of Kenyans how they can together fight the war on terror. That tonight is the point.